and welcome to my new series called K26 and Beyond. I'm your host, Captain Xavier, and this series is going to be a guide on builds, on mods, but starting with the simplest mods. What can you do with nothing but a screwdriver, going all the way up to what can you do with a shop full of power tools. And the goal is to do it in increments so that you can see, okay, well, I've got this skill set and tool set, or my budget will allow me to do all of this. But it'll give you an idea of what can be done with varying levels of tools, skills, and budgets, which will hopefully be valuable to you guys. And you'll be able to increase your builds as you go. So you might start with the simplest, and then when you acquire the tools, move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. And the blasters that I'm going to be showing off are chosen by you guys, and a lot of them are going to be... could be very similar. So single-shot, muzzle-loaded pistols, more or less what you can do to one, you can do to another with varying small differences. And I will cover things like flywheel blasters and possibly even air blasters, and based on what you guys choose. So the first one that you guys chose was the FireStrike. I went with single-shot pistols, ones that I knew could take K26, and a couple that I knew couldn't. And so the idea was, well, what could you do with it? But this is a very good one because these ones are available at Goodwill a lot. I passed them up at this point. There's so many of them. So this is a good one if you're wanting to get into beginning modding. We're going to go from what can you do with just a screwdriver all the way up to stuff that are going to require, you know, at the very least a Dremel, if not more. So let's get this thing open and take a look at the inside. The stock performance of this one was 60 FPS. So that is what we are hoping to improve upon. And I will hopefully get you FPS numbers on all the different increments. The weather here has not been cooperating, though it is currently quite nice outside. So I'm hoping I can get at least a few of the levels done today before the weather goes, so that I can get the chrono numbers for you guys. So you have some idea of how much of an improvement given things create. So I believe I am using a number 0 Phillips head screwdriver. It's one that Foam Blast, I think they were carrying them, but the little logo just immediately rubs off if you so much as look at it. So I don't know if they actually sell them, but these ones are actually very nice. And it's in my colors. Alright, so we got this thing open. So I'm not going to fiddle with the electronics. You could obviously put in a better LED or a better flashlight or an actual laser pointer. There's varying options you can do with that, but I'm interested in the performance. Not going to cover cosmetic mods in this series much, since there's just too many different options, and so you're really going to be on your own for what you want to do cosmetically. Okay. So we are going to take this whole system out, and the simplest modification that you can make to a single-shot pistol, and the FireStrike is a good option for this because generally the plunger tube is not glued or solvent welded in. Try not to break off these tabs if you can avoid it. Sometimes they're pretty much pre-broken. This one actually was. So the first thing we're going to do is take out the air restrictor, which in this particular model and in a lot of these single-shot pistols, it practically falls out all on its own. And that's all you have to do. You take out the air restrictor and you take out its spring, and you can now just put the thing back together, and it will have at least some improvement. Or at least we're going to see if it does. I, in general, especially with magazine-fed blasters, I don't recommend removing the air restrictors anymore. A benefit that you get from it is largely offset by the added wear and tear on the blaster, which comes from dry firing, which you're much more likely to do in a magazine-fed blaster if you don't have some kind of a magazine, or empty magazine lock, which it is possible to create. You can make a slight modification to your magazines, and they will no longer be able to be fired. You'll no longer be able to fire the blaster if you're out of ammunition, which is handy. Try not to lose the tiny nut that is the thread for the battery housing. Okay, now we're going to button it back up real quick and see how much of a difference that made. Stock performance was 60, like I said. So if we can get, I don't know, up to 65 or more than that, then, you know, you could argue that it was worth it. Now, with single-shot blasters, the risk of dry firing is less, because you really ought to know whether you've put a dart in the barrel or not. So it's not like it's going to sneak up on you like a magazine-fed blaster is, where you're slam firing and suddenly you're empty and you've dry fired it 3 or 4 times before realizing it's empty, and that can be hard on the internals if you haven't padded the plunger head or anything like that, if your seal isn't good enough. And the plunger head is really getting driven forward. Alright, I'm going to go chrono it. I'll be right back. Alright, well, just taking out the AR increased the FPS by 7. It hit 67 3 times in a row, actually. I was kind of surprised that I got 3 duplicates. So, yeah, that is the easiest thing that you can do using just a screwdriver. You could also take off the dart post while you're in there, just snip it off, which will allow you to put in half darts. You'd have to, you know, ramrod them in, or put 2 of them in and kind of shotgun it, but that is something that will happen next. Next thing we're going to take a look at is a spring upgrade. A simple spring upgrade using a spring from another blaster. So the next thing we're going to look at is a simple spring upgrade. Now, in some blasters, you can actually just double up the spring with another one from the same blaster, if you happen to have 2 FireStrikes. But in this case, I wasn't able to get enough compression because of the thickness of the spring and the frequency. It won't get enough compression. So what you're going to need to do is find a spring that either will fit inside it and not interfere with the catch mechanism, or one that will fit around it but will still fit in the plunger tube. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly what spring I'm using, because I'm just going to be pulling from the bin. That one might work. So I think this one is going to work. It is larger. It will fit around the outside, and therefore the two shouldn't interfere with each other when compressing, as you can see. No idea what it's from. I do know that often a lot of the Busby revolvers, the springs are either heavier or are a size that will in fact fit around stock Nerf springs. So we're going to thread this over the top of that one. And as you can see, plenty of compression. So now we're going to put this back in here and hope I haven't once again lost my catch spring. Now, what we don't know, we're not entirely certain that we're going to get enough compression. I think we're going to, but I've been wrong before. But more importantly, I don't know if that stock catch spring is going to be sufficient for the job anymore. But we will find out. Alright, we have caught. Let's go get new chrono numbers. Success! We're now hitting 80 FPS 3 times in a row, so not only is it an improvement, it's a consistent improvement. So what we've done so far is take out the AR and increase the spring by doubling it up with another spring from a blaster long since gutted and forgotten. Now you could put the AR back in and see what you'd be getting. You'd probably be getting, you know, about 5 to 7 FPS lower, which would put you in the 70s somewhere. But at this point, you might as well leave it out. So, the stock catch was capable of supporting that. Once you get to K26 and really heavy spring loads, that tends to no longer be the case, which is what we're going to go up to now. Now, there are lots of other spring options besides K26. I use K26 because I have lots of it, because it's cheap, because it fits, and because it is reasonably powerful. Now, there are heavier options, obviously. You know, you could probably put K14 in one of these if you felt like it. The Hillman, there's Hillman springs that are heavier. There's Fastenal, I think 55 is heavier. I don't know if that one will catch in this, though. Whereas K26, I know will work, so that's what we're going to go with first. At the very least, you want at least as much as you had originally. Now, you can probably get away with more and still be able to catch, but that is dubious. I mean, you can always cut it longer, and if it doesn't catch, shorten it, and shorten it until it finally does catch. If you don't mind wasting a couple of coils. If you've got lots of it, you know, that's not exactly a problem. At this point, you are going to need to go up to another tool. Namely, bolt cutters or a Dremel or something capable of cutting the stronger wire. So, we're going to cut it off a little bit long. Not a lot. Maybe 1 or 2 coils extra. So we've got our K26. If you have a metal file, it's a good idea to file the ends that are cut, because they tend to get cut really sharp. Metal files, definitely a good tool. Okay, so we've got our K26. It's about 1 coil longer than standard, which puts it at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10... 10 and a half rings, coils, almost 11. All right, and now we are going to once again thread it onto our plunger rod. And this is why you don't want it sharp, because it will chew up your plunger rod, which it's going to do anyway. At this point, you may need a pair of pliers to help you get it started going around. Once you get it going, it's generally fairly easy to keep it going. Another reason you want to loosen up those ends so you don't accidentally stab or cut yourself in this process. Okay. Now, as you can see, there is some damage. I don't know how well that's focusing, but there is some damage to the plunger rod, and you can simply clean that up with your file. So it doesn't snag on anything. Okay, so now we've got K26 on there. At this point, we are definitely going to need to increase our catch spring. Now, once again, you can try doubling up your catch spring from one that you've taken from another blaster if they will nest inside each other. Alternatively, there are plenty of options for heavier catch springs. I am very fond of Fastenal 155. It comes in a fairly long length. You can usually get 3 or 4 catch springs out of one section of it, because this stuff is a little too dense. I also have, you know, my collection of random springs, which occasionally has, yeah, that ought to be a good one. Some decent catch springs. They come from a lot of different places. The Deploy is one of the better places to get extra springs, because it has a lot of extra springs that power all of those silly gimmicks of it that it has. All the parts that flip out and all of that. There's a lot of springs in there, and some of them are actually really good replacement catch springs for other blasters. So that is why I keep getting deploys, or why I got them early on was because I needed the parts. Okay, so we're just going to tack a few screws in, make sure that it'll catch. Now, something to be aware of is that any mechanical device, no matter what it is, if it has moving parts, they are eventually going to wear out and quit working. And in the case of Nerf blasters, the part that's going to wear out is the catch mechanism. So the catch plate will get worn down by time, and the catch notches on the plunger tube are going to get worn down with time, and when you put in a much heavier spring, that wear and tear is going to be exacerbated, and it will wear out sooner. So doing these kinds of really heavy mods is going to shorten the life of your blaster. That is simply a trade-off that you're going to have to accept when you do high-performance mods, unless you replace those parts with better versions of those parts, metal versions or Delrin versions or whatever. You will eventually need to replace them, but it will now catch. And K26 isn't so powerful that it's hard to prime or hard to catch. There is not a whole lot of additional space for compression, so that pretty much is exactly as much as I could get. There's really no extra space after it catches, so that 11, 10 3/4 is about perfect. We're going to go chrono it. Now we're starting to reach the limit of the barrel, which is why that will be the next thing that we upgrade. But let's go see how much power we got out of that. Now, so far, all we have needed is a screwdriver and something to cut the K26. Alright, so that was another 10 FPS increase just from adding K26. So we're up to 90 from the original 60. So we've had a 50% increase in the amount of FPS we're getting just by increasing to K26 and using an added catch spring. You might be able to get away without the catch spring, but it's probably a good idea to have it in there to prevent it from slipping when you don't want it to. So far, the only tools that we have needed have been a Phillips screwdriver that will get you in there, and then something to cut the K26. Now, I used bolt cutters. You could also use a cutoff wheel on a Dremel. You could use a hacksaw, whatever you happen to have. So we're still fairly simple tool-wise, which is nice. The downside is we've reached the limitation largely of what the blaster can handle without more significant upgrades. Increasing the spring will only get you so much because of the limitations of Nerf barrels. The stock Nerf barrels are only tight for about the first ½ inch of the dart, and then the rest of it is fairly loose. Not quite fall out loose, but they will. And if you still have the ARs in and you're using worn darts, they can get pushed out and it'll engage the AR without, you know, you even firing the blaster, and then when you go to shoot it, it won't work. So, what do we do about the barrel? Now, the simplest solution, the low-tech solution, is simply to put some tape in there. I generally would use electrical tape. I did this in my rough cuts because they had a tendency to push the darts out, and then that led to all kinds of issues. But just adding a little bit of tape in there will increase the friction, and it will help keep the dart in there. So you can do that. That isn't going to increase the power at all at this point. That's really just going to keep the dart from getting pushed out if you've got the AR in. If you don't have the AR in, less of a problem. So the next step up is putting in a brass barrel. So a full brass barrel, which Nerf darts are 50 caliber. They are ½ an inch diameter. So you need a material that is ½ inch inside diameter, which, fortunately for us, 17/32 inch brass is ½ inch inside diameter and creates a beautiful airtight seal around a Nerf dart, which is quite fantastic. The length that you go with is largely up to you. If you brass a barrel without increasing the spring load enough, it'll actually reduce the power because it'll take so much power to overcome the friction on the barrel that you end up losing power. So you need to make sure that the brass length is appropriate to your spring load. Now, you can shorten that brass as much as you want. You don't have to have a brass the full length of the dart. You can do just partially, just around the opening of the barrel, or at what point the brass actually becomes tight, and that will improve that seal for you and give you a little bit more power. But a full brass barrel is by far superior if you have enough force behind it. Now, I'm not actually going to do the brass barrel on this one, because I have done them in the past. I actually have a whole video just on brassing barrels, and the technique is exactly the same. You will need to drill out or bore out or file out in some manner the the original barrel because the brass will not fit nicely as it is. So just to cover how the brass barreling works, with this, the whole barrel comes off and it's fairly simple. You need to drill that out. I have a 17/32 inch drill bit that I start it with to get the tight part of the barrel out, because I don't know if you're going to be able to see, but there is a section towards the base where the barrel is considerably tighter. That's the part that's actually tight around the dart. You need to actually drill all of that out so that you can get the brass in, depending on how much brass you want in there, of course. I then generally have to file it out a little bit. I did recently get a new tool that would supposedly make it easier, but I think I got one size too big. I haven't really tinkered with it much yet. But you drill that out enough so that you can pound this down in there. You can glue it if you want. I generally have them tight enough that that's never an issue. At this point, you probably want to go ahead and take off the dart post because it serves no purpose, really. So we are going to go ahead and clip that because we are going to need it gone for the next step we are going to do. Now, I'm going to go see if I happen to have a brassed night finder so that I can get the numbers for you guys. So I was able to find my brassed one. It doesn't have a full-length barrel. I made it even with the end so it wouldn't risk cutting in one. But it did add another 10 FPS. So with a brassed barrel in K26, we're coming in at 100. So, an even better improvement. So, the one I'm going to do now, and this is one I've never actually done, so I'm excited to do it. We are going to do a half dart breach. And we will see if that works at all. I'm genuinely curious. I may actually have to increase the spring load in order to do what I'm wanting to do. But we are going to cut an opening in the shell, and then we are going to fabricate a full sealed brass breech, which is created by nesting 17/32 inch brass into 9/16 inch brass, which is the next size up, which creates a perfect air seal. And if we cut a little breech door in there, we can then load in a half dart and then slide this breech back onto it and get a nice long, much longer breech than we would to normally. And the nice thing is that the sliding part of the breech, the 17/32, is removable. So you can simply pull it out and make it longer or shorter as you see fit, as long as you can still reach enough of the barrel to pull out the breech and open it. So that's what we're going to try next. We're going to see what that gives us. Like I said, I've never done this particular mod on one of these, so I am excited. So we're going to have the 9/16 coming out of this barrel, which means it needs to get filed out a little bit. So we've added another tool, a round file, which you would have needed to do the brass breech, just the brass barreling as well. And like I said, that is covered in its own whole video. There we go. Now the 9/16 will fit. So we have the front part stabilized. We are then going to pretty much cut this off most of the way. If not quite all of the way. I'm going to leave a little bit just in case, and if I end up cutting it down, then I will cut it down, but I need to make sure that I have enough room. Okay, now we need to bore that out to fit the 9/16. So I'm using a drill bit, but I'm not actually putting it on the drill. I'm just manually rotating it through. The drill bit would get caught and probably injure me, and I'd rather not do that. Trying not to break off any more of the tabs than absolutely necessary. This is a 9/16 drill bit. So it should bore the hole out enough. But we are... Yep, we are. Okay. Alright. So there we go. We've got it mounted on that side. Now we just need to know exactly how long it needs to be for this particular blaster. So that is how much of the 9/16 we need. So we're going to go ahead and cut that off right there. Actually, I think we're going to want more than that. Dart's going to go in right there. We are going to want a little bit more. Okay. Now, we're going to use a pipe cutter. They are quite lovely. This is another tool. Again, you could cut your brass pipe with a Dremel with a cutoff wheel. You could use a hacksaw. I like using a pipe cutter because it's very clean. The one downside, of course, is it does crimp in the end a little bit. Now, in some cases, this is good because it actually creates a natural, dart stop. But in this case, it isn't good because the smaller brass won't fit. So you're going to need to flare it back out. Now, I have this very handy ball-peened planishing hammer that allows me to uncurve the brass quite easily. If you don't have one of those, you can do it with just a pair of needle nose pliers. So you're just pushing down and twisting to bend the brass back out. And there we go. Now it is still an airtight seal. Still slides fairly smoothly. Not so smoothly that it's just going to fall out, though, which is important because you don't want it to do that. Now, we need to cut our breech. Alright, so we are going to mark out, you can see in through that slot where the barrel is, and that's where the breech is going to be. We're going to cut out a notch there. And it needs to be big enough for our half dart, which it's, well, we might need to come back a little bit further, it looks like. We're going to continue that line, follow it up to that line, come around, and that should give us enough of an opening to feed in. Now, I just realized I'm currently building it right-handed, and I don't want to do that because I'm left-handed, and I want to be able to use this. We're going to move the breech to the other side. Which unfortunately means cutting through the logo. We're going to cut right through between strike and fire. So it's just going to say fire. We're going to try to leave the top of the Elite there. Okay. Now we once again need to add another tool because you need something that can cut through the shell. I favor a Dremel, a variable speed Dremel. It's got a foot pedal that allows me to control it, and then I have a grinding bit, which is absolutely lovely. Okay, so there's our breech. We will need to cut a little bit out of this barrel assembly as well. Alright, final thing we need to create is, of course, the actual breech. So, the length of our half dart and the width. That ought to do it. See how that looks when it lines up. Well, I had it right the first time. I had you right the first time. Yeah, we should be able to feed a dart in there. Hopefully. We'll find out today. Now we need to make that cut. And for that, you're going to need, that's right, another tool. Now you need a cutoff wheel on a Dremel. Really not a whole lot of other ways to do this that I know of. There may be ways to do it with the right saw, but I'm definitely going to recommend cutoff wheel and a Dremel. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but always use eye protection, especially when using cutoff wheels, because if you tweak them wrong, they can shatter and shoot sharp pieces at your face. The brass is starting to get hot. Alright, adding some more tools to the mix. I like to clean up my brass using diamond-headed files because they are beautiful for this. They're omnidirectional. Can clean up the cut really nicely. Okay, that brings us to the buttoning it up stage, which means we need to glue. And I'm going to use Loctite super glue. In a number of places. I am going to glue this cap in place. It used to hold the AR in place, and it doesn't anymore, and we no longer have any need of it coming apart, and we don't want it to on accident. So I am going to glue the whole front of the plunger tube assembly in place to keep it from wandering off. Make sure you've got it all the right way, because the plunger tube does have tabs that make sure that require it to go one way and not the other. We're going to do a little bit more cleaning on our brass. Well, I've got it up. There is a little bit of padding on the plunger head. You might go ahead and add some more just by adding a disc of craft foam or rubber or something, if you're particularly worried about dry firing, which is something you should be at least mildly concerned about, if not exactly paranoid about it. Alright, so there is the brass breech completed. You can see that by pulling on the inside barrel, you can open up the breech there, and you can feed in your dart. The actual performance at this point is going to be down to a lot of tinkering and tweaking. Like I said, I haven't done this before, so I don't know the optimal barrel lengths. There's probably videos out there and all of that. But it's going to be a matter of what your spring load is compared to the length of your barrel will determine what kind of FPS you're getting. You're also going to want to work on your seals. Definitely going to want to pad the plunger head. But this one will get you, well in excess of 100. Without any tweaking at all. When I first tested it, came in at 110, and that's non-optimal barrel length, non-optimal spring load, so tweak it as necessary. Do some experimentation. Start with a long barrel, and you can shorten it in increments until you get down to an FPS that you are happy with. Yeah, so let's kind of recap. The first level, taking out the AR, all you needed was a screwdriver. The next level of adding a spring, you needed a screwdriver and the spring. A pair of needle nose pliers may make it easier to get the spring on and off the plunger rod, but you can do it by hand if you're using a light enough spring. Going up to K26, you're going to need something that can cut the K26. Either bolt cutters or a cutoff wheel on a Dremel or a hacksaw. I recommend the bolt cutters or the Dremel, as they're much easier, and the Dremel can get you a nice clean cut, though it's going to be rough on your cutting heads. Next level, we went to brass. You will, of course, need the brass, which is 17/32 for elite darts. And you're going to need something to help bore out the barrel, either a large drill bit, 17/32 inch drill bit, or you can just use a round file. Though I recommend a combination of the two. The drill bit will make sure that the boring out is even. The file you can then get a little bit more so the brass will fit, but I recommend then going back over it with the drill bit to, again, make sure that it's fully round so you get a good seal. You can then, of course, put in, super glue if you want to improve the seal. I've never had an issue with that because I was able to get a good seal just with the tools. For padding your plunger head, which is a really good idea when you go to a heavier spring load, you're going to need some craft foam, which is what I use, 1/4 inch craft foam, a pair of scissors to cut said craft foam, and some super glue to attach said craft foam to the end of your plunger head. And this will save your plunger head from getting cracked and damaged if you dry fire, which you should try to avoid as much as possible. Now, once you go to the full breech, you're going to need something that can cut the shell. I use a Dremel with a grinding head. I then highly recommend getting some diamond files for cleaning up your shell work. Also for cleaning up your brass, which you're going to need something to cut the breech in your brass. Again, Dremel with a cutoff disc is best for that. You are going to need another size of brass. You are now going to need 9/16 inch brass for the outer part of your breech. And you will need something that can cut the brass, either a pipe cutter or a hacksaw. If you use a hacksaw, you're going to need to clean up your brass. If you use the pipe cutter, you're going to need something that can unbevel, uncurl the end of it, which you can use your needle nose pliers for just by pushing in and twisting. It will bend it back out. You're far better off, of course, using brass that is not crimped on one end, so that you can slide the two ends of brass together. You're going to want to flare one end of it anyway, so if this is the original uncut end, it should fit into the uncut end of the 9/16 perfectly, and it will create an airtight seal and will be lovely. It should move fairly smoothly. If you've had the ends crimped and then you had to uncrimp them, it's going to be a little bit harder, but that's probably a good thing so it doesn't just fall out when you point the barrel down. I use the same super glue to secure the brass as I do for everything else, because Loctite is wonderful that way. You might want a marker for marking where you're going to do your cuts. I did it with a pencil. You can mark the brass with your pen. I like to have a heavy metal file for cleaning up brass and springs. And if you're deciding to reinforce your shell, epoxy putty. I use Odie Fix-It Stick, which can be gotten at Lowe's. For working on your seals, you're going to want some kind of lubricant. I use white lithium grease. You may also, if the seal is getting really worn out, you may use Teflon tape underneath it, but if you put too much in, then the friction actually slows down the plunger head and it doesn't make it any better. So be very sparing with the Teflon tape. So there you have it, kind of the escalating options that you can do to a FireStrike. This does apply to things like the Pink Crush and the Night Finder and similar rear prime single barrel blasters. So there you have it. The survey for the next one has also already been put up. I will put the link to it down there as well. That one is going to be on flywheels, so I will be going over basically a escalating guide on flywheels next time. But which blaster I choose to show off will be up to you. So go ahead and vote on that. Let me know if any of this was useful, or if you think I've done something terribly wrong, or if you have links to even more in-depth stuff, especially on the later stage stuff, the fancy breach mods, because I know there are much fancier ones than I'm covering here, but I didn't want to go into too complex of a design and involve too many exotic materials. This brass can be got at things like Hobbytown or Amazon, or even Walmart apparently carries it. Ace Hardwares generally have a good selection of brass as well. So material-wise, it's fairly low. You've got your K26 spring that you can get from out of darts. You've got craft foam that you can get at any craft store. You've got brass that you can get at some craft stores and some hardware stores. And that's just about it as far as materials. And then it's a matter of tools. Tools you build up over time. Tools are the expensive part, but once you have them, then you have them. So anyway, there you have it. Let me know if this was helpful. Let me know if you want me to continue this series. What kinds of blasters you'd like to see in the future. I will probably, cover the same thing, but on other blasters. But for the most part, I want to try to do a larger variety as possible. So I may do air blasters next. Let me know what kind of things you'd like to see on that survey. And hope this was helpful. Thank you guys for watching.